Good morning, everyone. Welcome to NYMER's webinar to prepare you for floods, storm surges, and how to prepare and recover. Today, we have Bill DeRosier, who is from Hartford Steam Boiler. He is their Director of Risk Management. He's going to walk us through this, a number of scenarios, present a number of different exposures that you need to be aware of and prepare for. They'll be talking about, how you can develop good sound procedures for making sure that going into events, you're fully ready to deal with them and then to recover afterwards. As you all know, we've been experiencing quite a number over the years, recent years, of significant storm and flood activity. It doesn't look to any of us like that's going to go away anytime soon. So welcome again. I'm going to turn this now over to Bill so that he can go ahead and give you his take on all this.
Thank you, David. Again, I'm Bill DeRosier with Hartford Steam Boiler Inspection and Insurance Company. Most of you know HSB through our boiler inspectors that come out to your facilities on a regular basis to do the inspections, the jurisdictional inspections. HSB does a number of other things, including the boilers and machinery coverage. But today we're going to talk about floods and storm surges. And as some of you unfortunately know from recent events, that these can cause catastrophic losses to property and equipment. Minimizing the losses depends on being prepared and having a recovery strategy. Often we hear about weather forecasters predicting doom and gloom at every forecast. Sometimes we do get a bad storm, but more often than not, we don't experience the bad storms that they're predicting. And after a while, we all get complacent and figure it's not going to happen here. However, as you know, recently, parts of southern New York went through a nor'easter about a month ago with winds and rains, but thankfully without the cold and snow. Some flooding may be possible in the summer as well as in the winter. California just experienced a historic storm called a cyclone bomb, which caused widespread flooding. It triggered mudslides, massive power outages, and things of that nature. Locally, in the past, we've had some issues that are unfortunately very similar, and thankfully they have been few and far between. We know back in August of 2011, over in the Prattsville section of New York in the Catskills, they were nearly flooded off the map due to a heavy rainstorm that lingered in the area. And we have just come off the 9th anniversary of Superstorm Sandy, which created a lot of devastation, especially in southern New York. Although we can't change the past, we can work to change the future. Today, hitting this forward button, that didn't seem to work. I think my screen is frozen. Bear with me one moment, please. David, if you wouldn't mind, would you bring up the PowerPoint that I sent to you and flip it on? I am running into a technical difficulty here.
Okay.
I'm sorry for this slight technical glitch. We did do a test earlier and it seemed to run fine, but like most things, Murphy and his law have come into play. Again, I'm with Hartford Steam Boiler, and I've been with HSB for almost 10 years now. And like most of the folks in our home office in Hartford, I'm operating on basically a second career. Most of our engineering staff at the home office have had previous lives in industry, everything from running large power plants to manufacturing facilities, IT operations and things of that nature. So I've relied on them and their years of experience in those industries to help come up with some of these preparations and recovery plans. So this is not just my experience. This comes from a vast background of HSB engineering resources. Thank you. I guess we're up on slide 2. This is basically the agenda of what we're going to cover today. We'll talk a little bit about flood preparation and recovery resources that are available to you. Some design that can be introduced to reduce the flood damage risk, protecting buildings from flood and water entry. We'll talk about boilers, because HSB primarily handles boilers and preparation and recovery from storms, but HSB covers virtually all of your equipment that's run on any type of energy, whether it's run on electricity, gas, oil, geothermal, wind, or whatever. So we will talk about some of the other equipment, including the HVAC equipment and IT equipment, electrical equipment, which every one of your facilities has exposed. And we'll talk a little bit about IT equipment and preparation and recovery along those lines. You want to flip to the next? Thank you. The first thing I want to just mention before we get too far into this is it's never too early to start planning. Yes, we missed, this would have been a great program to put on a month ago prior to the nor'easter that we experienced, but we can't change that. So now is the time to plan for the next big one. So key steps should be taken in advance, and we're going to talk about those initially, but of the utmost importance, and I can't stress this any more fervently than this, saving property may be important. However, never place anyone at risk in trying to protect property from damage or repair any of the damage that did occur. All work must be performed by people trained to do that type of work and done when there is no danger of injury. If you're experiencing a flood situation and it gets critical and you have to pull the people out, do that before it happens. And in a recovery phase, don't put people at risk for any reason to try to mitigate the problems or recover from the problems unless they are absolutely positively in a position of safety. One of the first steps that we want to talk about is finding out where your facilities are relative to the flood prone areas. FEMA puts out a flood map and there's a lot of good information there, and you should be familiar with the flood map, not just the one that you used 10 years ago. FEMA is always updating their information. You should understand where your facilities are. Are they in a FEMA zone B? Are they in zone AO? Is there a difference between those types of zones? I suggest that if you don't know, you should quickly find out. And FEMA is constantly updating these. And you can see on the lower portion of the slide, the FEMA website that you can go to get additional information. And I will mention that this presentation is being recorded and it's going to be on the NYMER website. So you can go back and access it at any time. And if you want a copy of the actual slides, contact David and I'm sure he'll share them with you. So you can have those, all of the different websites that we have that we're going to talk about in here. The addresses are on the slide, so you can go back there, look up the information without too much difficulty. But when you pull up the flood maps, you'll be able to see the updated information about where your facilities are. This is a good starting point. It's not necessarily the only place to look. You should take a look at not only the flood map, but go outside your facility, walk around. What are the exposures there? Are there little streams or drainage areas nearby that you may want to take a look at and make sure that they are flowing properly, especially if a storm is on the way? Those things may inadvertently get backed up for some reason and cause damage that wouldn't be on the normal floodplain or flood maps. Continue to the next slide, please. I'm sure All of you have been involved with pre-planning for your municipalities. There are many resources out there that you can use to help put together a preparation plan. I'm sure most of you have done it. Maybe all of you have done it, especially those involved with municipalities and emergency planning. However, HSB does have a preparation tool. I'm not suggesting that you scrap yours for using ours. I would suggest that if you don't have one, take a look at ours. And if you do have an emergency plan in place, you may want to also just take a look at ours to see if there's something covered in ours that may beef up your plans. It's free for use. It's available on the HSB site. It's available through the folks at NYMER. It's free to use. We have an electronic version that you can go and add the information online if you do decide that you want to use ours. What ours will do that many I've seen do not do is we take it beyond the obvious. Everybody should have emergency contacts of different outside facilities that they would contact in an emergency type situation for a flood or other type of emergency. We go a little bit farther beyond that. Go to the next slide, please. Some of the things that we ask for are obvious to most people, but if you're in the military, police, fire, and EMS, you're constantly reviewing and training on the emergency scenarios. So I would suggest all of you do that too. And you should check your plan periodically to make sure it is up to date, at least annually. Are your contractors still willing to respond if needed? Now, when we talk about outside resources, one of the things that we want to make sure that we do is not to just list the local resources that you utilize for your normal day-to-day operations and minor emergencies. If you're in a situation where you have a major flooding or other type of situation that is affecting a large area in and around your community, all of those local resources are either going to be temporarily out of business or out of commission, or they may be tied up with their other problems and may not be able to respond to you quickly. What we're suggesting is that you keep your primary contacts and you talk to them regularly to make sure that they're ready to respond and they have all the right equipment, but also to develop resources far beyond the normal area, maybe 50, maybe even 100 miles away, so that if there is a major situation impacting your area, that you can contact resources outside of this impact area who may not be experiencing these types of problems, or at least to the extent that you are, and you can bring these resources in. It may seem a little ludicrous to have a contract and contact with people, at a facility 100 miles away that you may never use under normal circumstances. But when an emergency hits, those are the types of resources that you want to, you're going to need to bring your facilities back up and running. If you look at all the major utilities, whenever they're expecting a big problem, they're contacting other utilities far outside the area, hundreds and hundreds of miles away, sometimes even up in the Canadian provinces, in the event that there is a problem, that they can bring resources down to address the needs of your area. One of the things that I also want to talk about as far as resources is your employees. Your employees are you rely on them to help get everything back up and running when you do experience a problem. However, if you do have some major, for example, flooding in your area, your employees may also be adversely affected. They may be taking care of their families and their properties and may not be able to get to your facilities to do the work that you would have expected of them. So you have to take this into account, not only to have backups for taking care of your problems, but also to work with your employees to make sure that they have taken proper steps in their homes and with their families to mitigate any problems that they may have. Keeping them happy and safe and getting them back up and running is a very critical component of getting your municipality back up and running. So, think a little bit beyond the walls of your municipal facilities. There's a number of things that you should do well before a storm hits. As I said, we been going through and talking about reviewing and updating your emergency plans. The other thing is you should be talking with your department heads and have tabletop events where you sit around, come up with a scenario of what's going to happen, and then you walk through your pre-plan, who's going to do what departments are going to be involved, what are you going to do at the different facilities, is the equipment and materials available for use? If you're going to have to do some diking, is there diking material and sandbags and other things available? Making sure everybody knows what they're responsible for. Have a specific checklist for everything. Don't rely on memory for anything, and be able to walk through step by step who's going to do what and when, and how long it will take, considering adverse conditions that they will be faced in a real event. Walk through this planning session, document everything. After the event is over, go back and review what was right, what was wrong, what can be improved on. I'm sure even with the best plans, somebody's going to think of something that wasn't in the plan that would be very, very helpful. So you can review the plan and update it accordingly. And little things that people wouldn't think of. Going up on the roof just to inspect roof drains and gutters. We had an incident a number of years ago at one of my facilities where in the middle of winter, we had a couple of feet of snow fall and stay on the roof. And then about a week or so later, we had a decent sized rain event, and the drains had been covered with snow and some melting, and they had been covered now by ice. So when the rain event occurred, it caused some ponding and then flooding from the roof down into the facility. Luckily for us, it was in an area that didn't have a lot of sensitive equipment, but we learned from that when we were expecting any kind of precipitation, whether it's rain or snow, that we go and check drains, the roof drains, drains in the facilities, if you have them, drains outside the facilities, your parking lots, checking again where these drains lead off to make sure that the water is going to flow properly through the entire area. We learned from that. So, every event, whenever we had any kind of snowfall, then maybe a thaw and a freeze and then a rainstorm, we had people go up and, as crazy as it sounds, year round, checking the roof vents, or the roof drains, to make sure that they were free and clear and were able to do exactly what they were supposed to do when we needed them. Then when you do have any kind of an event, a real event, whether it's a minor one or a major one, take a look, walk around your facility, go check it out. What went right? What went wrong? Are there things that need to be added to your plan? If you're expecting, certain things to happen and they don't happen, find out why, and are there better ways to do it? Next slide, please. Fema, federal agency, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with, has a ton of information that's available to you free of charge, and it's easily accessed. There's a website at the bottom of the page. You can click on it. There's all kinds of planning information available, resources that you probably never dreamed of. If you start flipping through these different manuals, you're going to find that there's a lot of things available, a lot of good ideas that could save you a lot of money in the future. And again, the time to look at these is not the day before a storm. I would suggest that maybe after this session that you go on the website, poke around and see what's available to you, and at least earmark it for a review somewhere down the road before the next major event happens. Next slide, please. As I said, they have a lot of different manuals, information for residential, non-residential occupancies, as well as your municipal buildings. And again, a lot of this information would be good to share with your employees so they can think about how to protect their homes in the event that there is some sort of a problem. There's details on new construction, but there's also a lot of good ideas on what you can do to mitigate some of the problems by making some minor changes. If you take a look at the pictures on the left side of the screen on the FEMA book, they've taken a hot water heater, and because of some potential flooding in the area, they've jacked it up a couple feet off the floor so that if they do have some minor flooding, it's not going to be adversely affected. In one of the other pictures, you can see some outside air conditioning heat pump type units that have been taken off the ground, jacked up 4 or 5 feet, put on a sturdy platform so that in the event that there is some minor flooding, they will not be adversely affected. So a lot of these changes can be done relatively easily for not a lot of money. There are times when you're going to have to invest some major dollars, maybe capital expenditures, but if you start looking at it now, you can start planning for the future. And hopefully you can get these things enacted long before a bad event ever occurs. Talk to, and not only read the FEMA books, but talk to other contractors, other people. I know you're all involved with different municipal agencies that share information. NYMER puts on different programs throughout the year where you're meeting your counterparts. See what they've been up against and what they've done. Maybe they have some very helpful, inexpensive ways to reduce the potential of having a problem. Also, remember, if you do have a flooding situation, a lot of the things that normally are available to you may not be available. For example, you may not have electricity, and you may not have it for a long period of time. You may not have potable water. Your sewers may be backed up. So you've got to plan for all of these other situations and how you're going to get through, keep your emergency facilities operating, and get the rest of your municipal facilities back up and running safely and efficiently. And here we have another picture that we took at one of our facilities that we insure. And they took their air conditioning unit and they put it up on the second floor, accessed by a lower roof. Now, this is in an area where it's probably not going to be affected by flooding. It is relatively easy to access, so they can do maintenance on it. Again, you've got the edge of the building, so they do have to take some precautions there, but it is relatively accessible, so they can work on it when they need to, repair, replace as needed. And it's out of the way of most of the flooding situations. Even if they had ponding and flooding on this lower roof, it shouldn't be too badly adversely affected. You may not have the money to do this immediately, but again, it's something to think about and put into your budgeting process. Let's flip the page, please. We'll talk about boilers and flooding in locations. If you can, David and I were talking about after some of the major flooding problems and hurricanes and superstorms that were in the area over the past 10 years, a number of different organizations and municipalities have taken some of their boilers and relocated them to upper floors. If that's a possibility, that's a great way to reduce that type of a problem. And where you can't, for whatever reasons, you may want to look at getting them off the floor, jacking them up if possible, and putting them on pedestals, maybe diking around them, or setting them up so that you can sandbag them and protect them from at least minor flooding. If this entire basement had 4 feet of water, it might be a real problem. But if you got 6, 8, 12 inches, you might be able to surround this boiler and protect it properly. You also want to make sure that you relocate all the electrical controls and panels. So even if the bottom of the boiler gets affected, the electrical systems won't be adversely affected, and it'll be a lot easier to get these back online. Take a look at the other types of services, whether it's a gas line to the boiler or fuel lines. make sure that they are in the highest areas possible and rerouted to keep them out of the water area. Digress for a moment. The HSB home office, we are on the Connecticut River, and just north of us, there is a brand new a relatively new restaurant and boating operation. And ever since I was a little kid, this area has been flooding every year. It's in the major flood area. If you get a minor rainstorm, this area floods. And I'm thinking, how do they build this absolutely beautiful facility down in the flood area? And I drove by it a number of times over the years, a couple of years that it's been there. And in the flood times, you look and you see that, you know, there's at least 2 or 3 feet of water surrounding this building. And I'm thinking it's ludicrous. Why did they waste their time and money doing it? Well, I had the ability to tour this facility about a year ago, and the entire first floor, which is really 2-floor area, it's about 25 feet high, is a large concrete room. All of the utilities are on pedestals dangling from the ceiling. So they're soft wired and they're easily movable. Anytime they're experiencing flood, they can roll them up, back up to the ceiling level, which is above the floods that they had over the last 100 years. So they're well out of the way of any flood waters, and they're easy to do. It only takes a few minutes to roll these up. They've also, on the sides of the building, they have vents. So any flood waters can easily pass through the vents and not push against the building, causing the building to have some structural damage. Everything about this building has been planned for a major flood. Would I have built one there? Probably not. But because it is for a major boating operation and a restaurant right on the water, they've done virtually everything that they can think of to make sure that no flood that has been had in the last 100 years will adversely affect the building or any of the utilities in the building. And all they have to do is, after a major flood, is to take a large hose the first floor down. It's all concrete anyway, but just hose the flood waters out of there, do some minor disinfecting, and they are back up and running. None of the utilities are adversely affected. I found that if you're going to build one in that area, they've done virtually everything right to reduce the likelihood of problems in the future. Whether you've built your buildings in adverse situations and locations, I can't comment on that. But for the facilities that you do have, you may want to start looking at what you can do to reduce exposures if and when you do have some flooding that occurs. And again, the flooding could be because of a natural event causing a stream or something else to rise, or it could be flooding because, as in my facility years ago, water ponded up on the roof, couldn't drain off properly, and then made its way back into the facility, causing a flooding of a couple of rooms. So floods don't have to be the big event that you see out there, where they're bringing in emergency rafts and fire department is out there in boats trying to rescue people. It could be flooding of your facility and your facility alone. So take a look at it from a number of different perspectives and try to figure out what can be done in the event that you do have a water situation and what you're going to do about it. I'll flip to the next slide. FEMA has a number of different checklists to go through. I've put a few of the items up here on the board. We've already talked about locating your facilities, each one of them, to see if they are in a flood zone. But again, going beyond the obvious, even if it's not in a high flood area, you could be adversely affected by other things, and you should look at your building every time before a storm to make sure it's in good shape. Do you have materials that you could use if you wanted to block up doors and windows to keep water out? Wood planks, sandbags, things of that nature. Do do your people know how to construct these so that they are able to withstand the flood waters? They don't easily get pushed out of the way just because you have flowing water nearby. It takes a little bit more than just winging it. Sometimes you have to actually talk to people in the construction business to see how they would have handled it, and be able to then construct these sandbags, berms, dikes, so that they do withstand the floods that you're expecting. Also, you have to take a look at how are you going to get water out of the area. If you're going to be running pumps indoors, obviously electric pumps are the safest. You don't want to run any kind of a gasoline operated or other petroleum operated pump or motor in a facility, but you may not have electricity. So do you have adequate number of generators on site, or do you have gas driven pumps that you can run outside with enough hose to get into the facilities, the suction hoses into the facilities to suck the water out, and then have enough waters on your discharge line, enough line to get to wherever you have to put the water. Again, you may have those handy, and you may have bought them years and years ago, but are they still in good shape? Are the connections still in good shape? Have the hoses rotted? Do they have to be replaced? Also, if you're going to be running these gas or other types of pumps, do you have enough fuel on hand, and is it adequately protected against the flood to get to the areas where you need them and not have them affected by the storms and the storm water? Next slide, please. Obviously, you should be testing your emergency generators on a regular basis, checking them, doing preventive maintenance, and all those good things. And when you do test your emergency generators, you absolutely want to run them under load. Start them up, put them under a good workload, and let them run for a significant period of time. And if you go back to the manufacturer's instructions, they usually tell you to operate them for at least an hour or two under load to make sure that they not only are running properly, but they're producing the electrical energy that's needed. That goes for whether it's a fixed generator on a site or whether it's a portable generator. Another consideration is if you're using gasoline or diesel powered equipment, do you have the proper bonding and grounding equipment so that when you transfer those liquids, flammable or combustible liquids from the containers into the generators or pumps, that they are properly protected against any kind of sparking or electrostatical discharge. So you should review the proper bonding and grounding equipment that's needed, and make sure that your people know how to do it properly. Again, in a bad situation, if you do have that spark and you do get a fire or explosion, the emergency folks, whether it's the fire department or the ambulance people, they may not be able to respond as quickly. So it's going to take a bad event and make it that much worse. So make sure that you have all of the necessary equipment on hand. It's in good shape. It's not deteriorated over years or gone past their expiration dates. These checklists are invaluable. Next slide, please. If you do have a situation and you feel that your equipment is going to be adversely affected, it's going to be flooded. For example, this boiler here, you've done everything you can. You really think that you're going to have a flood situation. Go in and shut down all of the supply lines, whether it's electrical, gas, oil, whatever it is. Make sure all of the valves are shut down. You power this equipment down properly so that if it is adversely affected, you do not compound the situation. Secure, disconnect anything that you can. If you can disconnect them and get them to an upper floor, that's great. There may be some smaller equipment that you can do that with, and it's going to, save you a lot of time and money to get this equipment back up and running. talks about securing different expansion tanks and compressed air tanks. Got to remember, if the water's high enough, they may end up start to float around and they can bang around and maybe damage other components. So take a look around the room, secure everything you can, anything that could potentially float or be damaged by something floating, that you secure it properly, guard it, get it out of the area if possible. Next slide. Okay, you've had the bad situation, you've had the flood. Now what do you do? Well, obviously you want to go in there and remove the obvious debris, mud, whatever. But you should default back to the experts that can service that equipment properly and the original manufacturer's information on how to get this equipment back up and running. People who just go in and try to wing it often cause more damage to the property as well as potentially to themselves if they do it improperly. If you don't properly clean this equipment and get it back to good operating conditions, when you flip that switch, you could, severely damage or destroy the equipment and possibly cause personnel damage too. You don't want any injuries at all for any reason. So don't attempt to test or operate it unless you follow all of the manufacturer's recommendations and you have an expert on hand who's gone through that equipment and made sure that it is in good operating condition. Take a look around. Has there been any erosion in and around your facility or the equipment? Whether it's a pad mounted generator outside or your boiler in the basement, water can severely undermine the area, and whether you're operating that equipment or not, over time it can settle, damage the equipment further, and cause other losses, possibly even disconnecting, rupturing the supply lines and causing significant pollution and other damage. You also have the maintenance people check the brickwork, refractory, insulation material. Make sure that it is dry, and where necessary, there are procedures that should be followed to dry this equipment and all of the refractory material. If you do it properly, you shouldn't have problems. If you do it improperly, you may damage this and cause significant dollar expenditures down the road. Again, going through the checklist, I'm not going to read all of these things, but the water that from the flood is obviously polluted, could have all kinds of contaminants in there, salt, chemicals from places upstream, sediment, who knows what is in there. Assume the worst. Everything should be properly inspected and disinfected properly. There are procedures depending on what the contaminants are on how to decontaminate these things. Again, personal protection is of the utmost importance. So make sure everybody involved in this knows what the hazards are. They have the proper personal protective equipment, and they're following all the procedures, not only in the operation and decontamination of the equipment, but the decontamination of their own selves, getting out of the hot zone back into a cold area, of the utmost important. But again, as they're doing their job, they should be checking and inspecting every aspect of the equipment, not just the main boiler per se, but going through all of the instrumentation, all of the wiring, every valve and line leading up to this piece of equipment should be checked to make sure it's in good condition, hasn't been damaged in some way by the event. You should also, in some cases where you have alignments, shafts, belts, pulleys, and other things, make sure that nothing has shifted. Don't just assume that it looks good, it's up, just flip it on and let's go. In addition to checking the motors and whatnot, check the alignment, check the belt tensions, do everything that the manufacturer's operating procedures call for. And if you're not sure, contact the manufacturer. If you don't have the manual, it's easy now with the internet to go online and get the manuals right from the companies, or if those companies are no longer in business, to get replacement manuals from a number of different areas. Next slide, please. It's not just the main pieces of equipment that we're talking about, disinfecting and powering and repairing. Take a look at every ancillary piece of equipment out there. You've got feed water systems that feed into boilers, for example. You've got to go through those, make sure that everything, all the components are tight, and that there have been no adverse effects from the flood waters, no contamination of the feed systems. If there has been, they have to be flushed, disinfected properly. Otherwise, you're going to be putting contaminated materials into your boiler, which is obviously not a good thing. Next slide, please. Repair and recovery. Electrical equipment, and especially HVAC equipment, is very susceptible to damage. Just like the boilers, you have your main pieces of equipment that you have to go through. For HVAC equipment, electrical is a very, very big part of the exposure. You should go through every aspect, or excuse me, not you should have a qualified person going through every aspect of the electrical equipment to make sure all of the components of the equipment are in excellent shape before trying to return these to service. Next slide, please. Another thing that you should be doing also is all of the manuals that you have, all of the paperwork for everything in your operations, whether it's equipment manuals, boiler certificates, any documentation that you have prior to the flood, make sure that those are removed from the area and secured properly so that they are available when you have to use them coming back from the flood. You should go through all of the equipment. As you can see here, you've got a lot of sediment that has accumulated on the equipment here. The water and other contaminants have caused some potential corrosion on the equipment. So some of this may be salvageable if decontaminated properly and put back to good operating condition. Others are going to have to be scrapped and totally replaced. Again, an expert in that equipment should be advising you on what should be done and get it done properly. Next slide. Just like on the other pieces of equipment there, FEMA has different checklists to help you go through it, checking every piece of equipment before you have a problem, what you should do, and then to prepare that equipment for a potential flood. And if unfortunately it is subjected to a flood, what you need to do to get this equipment back up and running. And remember, the equipment that you use to mitigate the problems and get back up and running may not be accessible to you. For example, you may not be able to get emergency equipment in there or maintenance equipment trucked into the area because of the floods. Your cell phones and radios and other things, flashlights or whatever, they all run on battery, and you may not be able to get replacement batteries or recharge these. So you better have a contingency plan for it. And it's better to call in emergency outside services and get them started early and then have to send them home than it is to wait too long until the problem has grown out into a proportion where nothing can be done to salvage the operation. So good planning, pre-planning is essential. And part of your pre-plan should be what we're going to do to get the systems back up and running, and how are we going to protect the people. And as the last line says here, it's going to take a lot of effort from a lot of folks. So you got to be prepared to feed them, get them potable water, and if necessary, they're going to have to be there for extended days. So you've got to be able to put them up into shelters and have them rest at night so they can come back in the morning fresh. Not only does FEMA have a lot of good documentation and information that you can use in your planning and recovery, but NEMA, the National Electrical Manufacturers Association, has a wealth of information. on the electrical equipment, and not only protecting the equipment, but getting it back up and running. All of your work should be supervised by a licensed electrician, somebody that is familiar with the most recent codes. As you know, they change on a regular basis. We want to make sure that everything is done to the newest code, so that it is properly up and running and protected and able to give you the most reliable service going forward. Here's an example on from one of the NEMA tables. It talks about if the equipment was damaged, giving you a good indication, at least an initial indication of whether it was repairable, or you should be looking at replacing it right from the get-go. Again, this is a great guideline to start with. A qualified electrician should be using this to help guide them in your recovery process. Next slide, please. Okay. Here's an example of some water damaged electrical equipment. And obviously the flood waters have receded, but we show contamination here. There's rusting. There could be sand and silt that has made its way under some of these covers. So wherever possible, you have to remove all the covers to see what's going on inside. Some equipment may be just scrapped from the get-go. You have to evaluate it and use the NEMA and the electricians to help guide you on this. Some equipment can be taken apart and rehabilitated. Every piece of equipment is going to be different. Next slide. Again, we have some more electrical equipment here. Equipment can be dried and should be dried, obviously, but if it's not properly decontaminated, you're going to have a lot of corrosion and potentially arcing and sparking down the road if you try to energize this equipment. So again, every single solitary piece of equipment must be evaluated, where you have different types of materials, whether it's copper, bronze, whatever. These materials interact differently when you put water or salt water or other types of contaminants in there. So they have to be taken apart, properly reconditioned, if possible, before being put back into service. Again, from NEMA, talking about what to do before there's a problem, as far as de-energizing the equipment, protecting it wherever possible, and then getting circuits back up and running. Some equipment is easily rehabilitatable. Others, you've got to scrap out. If you don't handle them properly, for example, on a winding, as it mentions in here, if you exceed the drying temperatures, you're going to damage this equipment, and it's going to be non-serviceable down the road. So your best intentions to get this up and running may have been to save a few bucks, but if you don't do it properly, you're going to damage this equipment, and not only damage that equipment that will have to be replaced, but if you tried to energize this, it could take out a lot more equipment. So if you don't do it right, it not only can damage that, but it may damage large portions or all of your different systems. So doing it and doing it right are of the utmost importance. Printed circuit boards, go to the next slide. Printed circuit boards are a big deal. Printed circuit boards, once they get contaminated, are very problematic to try to get back and clean and back up in service. It can be done, but again, you have to have professionals that are very skilled in this and have the right equipment and the right knowledge to get these things back up and running. In the old days, when before printed circuits, it was a lot easier to decontaminate these problems, but now everything in the building is running on a printed circuit these days, and in some cases, even your fluorescent lights and other types of lights have some sort of a PC board, very small printed chip in them. So everything needs to be decontaminated properly. Next slide. And here we have some other electrical equipment. As you can see, the steel bolts are severely corroded here. Copper bus bars are also corroded. Everything in here is corroded. It may not be able to be rehabilitated. You may have to replace everything here, but only a qualified electrician should be making that determination. This one doesn't look as bad. Excuse me. So if these spare parts here were properly protected, that's great. If they were damaged by the flood waters, again, you've got to go through every piece of equipment to make sure it's decontaminated properly. Open every cabinet, see what's behind the obvious. Even if it doesn't look like it was adversely affected, make sure everything is opened up, inspected properly, and even check the spare parts that you're keeping in cabinets to make sure that they weren't adversely affected, so that when the time comes that you need them, whether it's for this event or some other event down the road, they haven't been adversely affected and you're surprised that you can't get back up and running. IT equipment. If your IT equipment goes down, whether it's a 911 center or just the IT equipment that you have in your public works garage or in your town hall, if that goes down, you could be down for a significant period of time and could be losing a lot of time and money. Make sure, not just for an event, but review all of your backup procedures for everything. Do you have proper offsite backup? And when I say offsite, it may not just be in the next building over, because it could be adversely affected by a catastrophic type event. So make sure that you have backups that are in areas that aren't going to be adversely affected by the situation that you may find yourselves in. Prior to a problem, make sure that everything is disconnected properly, powered down properly. If you can remove the equipment, a lot of our computers and minis and even the mini frames now are small enough that they can be properly disconnected and moved to a non-flood area. Great idea. Take the time to review all the steps necessary so that when you do have this event, you can do it in a timely fashion. Power supplies, everything electrical. As you know, water and electricity just don't mix. And flood waters and the contaminants, they ruin everything. So if you do have battery backups for anything, and they're subjected to flood waters or other types of contaminants, you've got to go through those to make sure that if whether they're sealed or not, that all of the components are inspected and brought up to good conditions before trying to utilize this equipment. It's often overlooked, but a major sore spot when it does occur. Again, an after flood checklist, assess all the equipment that was subjected to damage and get that repaired and replaced. And for the equipment that you were able to move and relocate to an unaffected area, make sure that your IT personnel go through and properly hook everything up or supervise the hooking up and re-energization of the equipment. Don't leave it to us amateurs to do it. Otherwise, you may adversely affect the equipment and cause some other downstream damages. It's a good time to review your business continuity plans. What to do if you're going to be down for a significant period of time. Do you have an alternative site with the proper equipment and the backup material that you can operate your facilities at some remote location? Again, it doesn't have to be a 911 center. It could be something as simple as the accounting department for your town hall. If you're not up and running, that could upset major operations for your municipality. So take a look at the continuity plans, test them out on a regular basis, and make sure that they are up to snuff. Next slide, please. Again, more things to look at. with the advent of cloud hosting sites. Some of the backups are more readily available and easier to use. But again, it's a good time to test to make sure, know where these clouds are, what's being backed up and when, and making sure that your people are doing all of the steps necessary and backing up when they're supposed to be backing up. It's good to go through and do audits of these systems on a regular basis to make sure that everybody's doing things and not cutting corners. On a regular basis, you should be doing it, not just prior to a storm or a flood situation. That's basically it. I think we've got a couple more minutes. I don't know if any questions have come in.
They more to the they want the slides, and I put my email up there, dbloodgood@rightinsurance.com. As some of you out there have experienced the kind of adverse effects that Bill has been talking about, and you know how disruptive, how time consuming, how expensive and stressful it all is. As he had mentioned, some of the experts that you might need to turn to get yourself back up and running, they can also have a role in preparation. And so as the many details that Bill talked about today, you can see that this is a complex issue, and it really takes some thought beforehand and a lot of evaluation beforehand as well as after. And there's unfortunately no shortcuts to this sort of thing. Water touches everything that is in its path. And keep in mind too that when an event like this happens, it's real clear cut. It's happened. You have to go through and evaluate the potential damage. But consider too that some of your equipment is in damp locations to begin with and should be periodically evaluated. It's not uncommon for us to go into, for instance, a water plant and see a transformer with a significant amount of rust on it or whatever. They do not operate perhaps as efficiently as they could. Their lifespan is cut short, which is another aspect of many of the things that Bill hit upon, is that not only are you trying to get up and running, but you're also trying to preserve the equipment that you have made a significant investment in so that you don't have to replace it down the road. So really looking at it critically, developing those relationships with service organizations that can help you. Those experts are very important. And at times like this, if you're affected, it's not unlikely that others are affected. So you want to get that relationship formed so that they're aware of you as an important entity. So with that, I think that if there's any questions, of course, you can email me. I'll be in touch with Bill and we can get answers back to you. Let's see, we do have one question's just come in. How much time do you have to claim damage? Well, typically there's 90 days, I think, to put in a claim, but even if you are not sure that damage has occurred, it is always good to let NYMER know, call the claims number and let NYMER know that there is potentially some problem down the road that may turn into a claim. And that way, you can be prepared for that.
Also, by alerting NYMER, if you do have, obviously there's some sort of a potential situation where you may have a claim. NYMER may have resources to help mitigate the problem and maybe reduce it so that you don't have a claim. You correct the situation before you expend a lot of money and time and effort. So prevention, early activity before a problem and after a problem, getting involved quickly and inspecting it properly and getting the right people in there will help mitigate the problem. Contacting NYMER is never a bad thing.
Yeah, and with the wake up calls that we received from both Irene and Sandy back in the early part of around 2010, many of our members have put into their accommodations mitigating features in their facilities, develop procedures when since then, incidents have occurred, major storms. They found that they were much more able to respond to them effectively, and it caused a lot less grief on their part. So, Bill, I want to thank you again for bringing your expertise to our members. And as Bill had mentioned, if there's anyone that is in your organization that maybe didn't have an opportunity to be with us today, this has been recorded and will be uploaded to NYMER's Learn platform within a couple of weeks. Okay, so again, thank you all for joining us. I think we have one more chat here. I guess it's just a thank you, and we appreciate that. Thank you very much. Everybody have a great day. Appreciate your taking the time out today to join us.